And of course, even Albanese, Prime Minister Albanese, Albo, has sort of said, well, you know, every time he's looked at this, if you got rid of negative gearing, if you got rid of that challenge, if you got rid of CGT, basically you would cave in future supply, and then no one will have any homes to live in. Welcome to the Urban Property Investor. I'm your host, Sam Saggers, here to help you crack the code of real estate wealth. Today's show, code cracking stuff. Yes, we're going to talk about the latest news around the federal government tinkering with the tax system and property. They've recently commissioned Treasury to look into the tax advantages behind being a property investor. Does it sound like a broken record? Well, it should, because we've been here and done that so many times. But hey, it's back. It's crawled out of its rock. What are we going to do about it as property investors? That's what today's show's about. What can we learn? What's going on behind the scenes? Why is this sneaky little conversation piece reappearing in the news? And of course, for media outlets, this is absolute candy. It's absolute eye fodder. They love it. They love talking about it. Every news outlet in Australia wants basically a piece of it. Whenever we talk about reforming taxes, it's big news. And of course, there's no bigger tax reform than CGT and also negative gearing when it comes to the real estate economy. So that's what today's show's about. It's very topical. So welcome back, regulars. Play the program in double speed, get your life back. And of course, all the episodes I've done are lessons on real estate. So if listening about the trials and tribulations of tax reform is not your cup of tea, you're more than welcome to go back and listen to some more hardcore property stuff. Yes, I've got hardcore property insights from past episodes. So if you're hardcore, go back in time. But obviously there are those in Parliament that are basically trying to get Parliament leaning into the position of tax reform. And of course, if you understand the layout of Australian governance at the moment at a federal level, obviously, the Labor Party's in charge of the House of Representatives, and they have a clear majority there over the opposition parties. But in the Senate, it's a little bit of a different story. So in basic talk, the Parliament, obviously the House of Representatives, comes up with some ideas, some concepts to bring to the table and runs it through the Senate to pass certain laws. Now, the Senate is currently made up of 25 senators, which are part of the Labor Party, but the opposition party has over 30 senators. So to get any law passed, whether it's a tobacco law, whether it's a law of any worth, the government has to, through its senators, actually negotiate with minor parties to basically have the votes to basically supersede the Liberal Party, which basically has the majority of the senators in one bundle as an opposition in the Senate. So the government's got to negotiate with the Greens, Pauline Hanson, Jackie Lambie, David Pocock, the ex-rugby player, and so forth. And so for laws to get passed, the independents have a lot of say, and there's sort of currently 6 senators which are effectively independent. And so you can imagine there are deals being done behind the scenes. You passed this law, and we'll talk to you further about that law and so forth. And really, there are 2 kind of senators that really get super angry when it comes to capital gains tax. And they are David Pocock and Senator Jackie Lambie. Now, I think we all know Jackie, crazy Jackie from Tasmania. She's, goes right up the guts. She's quite a colourful character. And you can imagine she doesn't take a back seat, old Jackie. And of course, then you've got Senator David Pocock. If you followed the Wallabies and rugby union, David Pocock used to play for the Wallabies and now is a senator in the Australian Parliament. And those 2 collectively obviously have a bit of power when it comes to doing deals with the government. To get legislation through, the government needs to deal with these 2. And they've been very, very vocal around what they would like to see around a change to capital gains tax and negative gearing arrangements. They've even come out with their own proposal of 5 options that could be brought to life. So their options are basically all nonsense, but these are their options. Option 1 is to remove CGT discount after the 1st of July 2024. Obviously, that's already passed. So again, this is just rhetoric in the back end. So we all understand what's going on at a political level. So the government obviously hasn't listened to any of these proposals because that time has passed. But they basically have option 1 where basically you set a date and then you grandfather all of the discounts and negative gearing arrangements and CGT. In other words, if you own real estate today, you've got nothing to worry about, but into the future, you wouldn't get the benefit. So that's kind of option 1. Option 2 is if someone has 2 investment properties, you kind of apply the rule for the second investment property. Option 3 is you basically reduce CGT if people, but you create a ring fence around it so that people still get the benefit if they hold real estate longer than a certain period of time. And that period is highlighted by them as 3 years. And again, their other option is to basically make sure that people who have vacant homes don't get negative gearing benefits. So, for example, there's a lot of people with holiday houses who, rent them out, sub-rent them on Airbnb and stuff and get negative gearing benefits. As far as the summary of the proposal goes, it is a little bit closed-minded to the realities of our economy. But it makes headlines, and of course, I would imagine the government, the Labor Party, has got Treasury to do a review and audit, which will probably take a long time to basically appease Senator David Pocock and Senator Jackie Lambie. This will allow for some maneuvers, no doubt, to get certain other bills passed, which ultimately the government is probably concentrating on. To the Australian government, the negative gearing debate was taken to the 2019 election, and it got really nowhere. And if anything, it saw Bill Shorten basically lose the opportunity to become the Prime Minister. He was the shoo-in, and of course we all know what happened. The Stephen Bradbury happened. We got the old ScoMo, which also turned out to be a strange pick in the end, didn't it? The old ScoMo. But that's what's going on, folks. That's what's happening behind the scenes. And of course, government is maybe playing the delay, defer, defeat with Senator Jackie Lambie and Senator David Pocott. In other words, yep, we'll get Treasury to look at that. Yeah, great idea, guys. Let us come back to you. You've got our support. But I think we've also seen both the opposition leader come out and say, this stuff kills entrepreneurs in Australia, which I absolutely agree with. If you want to get ahead in life, it's up to you. And we live in a capitalist country. We don't live in a communist country. And in a capitalist country, effectively, free market capitalism needs to be activated. In other words, I can go to work, exchange my time for money. I can take that money and I can invest in assets for a better tomorrow for myself. That is the principle of freedom. And to remove that is, in some respects, a real dent on people's free choice. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But ultimately, the opposition leader, Dutton, has come out and said, not on our watch. And of course, even Albanese, Prime Minister Albanese, Albo, has sort of said, well, every time he's looked at this, if you got rid of negative gearing, if you got rid of that challenge, if you got rid of CGT, basically you would cave in future supply and then no one will have any homes to live in. So that was refreshing to hear Albo say that. He is obviously astute when it comes to this problem. So just so we know, this is the game of politics. There's politicking at foot. And when Senator Pocock and Senator Lambie looked into the actual goings on of negative gearing, they found that only 6% of property investors basically are negative gearing. So 6.1% of property investor taxpayers are negative gearing, and more than 14.4% were actually positive gearing. And when you positive gear, it means you're paying tax. So you've got basically 6.1% of taxpayers negative gearing, you've got 14.4% positive gearing. So just so we're very clear, negative gearing is the concept that the rent for the property investment doesn't cover the mortgage costs and the cost to run and operate the property, so you make a loss on the property. Because you make a loss on the property, you can reduce your taxable income, i.e. it comes off your tax base. And of course, because most property investors that are out there own one property, it reduces their tax by a minimal rate, typically like $10,000 a year or something. It doesn't reduce their complete taxable income, but it will perhaps lower them into a lower tax bracket. And of course, this is because those investors have taken the risk of getting into the real estate marketplace and are providing housing for an Australian who needs a roof over their head and can't afford to buy their own home. We call them tenants here in Australia. Obviously, 14.4% of Australians who own investments positive gear their properties, their positive cash flow. And that's very interesting because really, if you are a property investor, negative gearing is a small component of being a property investor, i.e., the first 5, 7, 8 years of being a property investor, you may be a negatively geared property investor. But eventually rents climb and your tax deductions disappear because you are now earning more rent from the investment that covers your interest costs and covers your cost of maintenance and repairs and holding costs for the real estate. And eventually your real estate ends up in a positive cash flow place. Now, I've bought a lot of real estate over the years, and effectively my investments for the most part are positive cash flow because I've held them for longer than 10 years. They end up leaving negative cash flow and jumping the fence to neutral and then jumping right over the fence to positive cash flow. So it's a good lesson here in actually Jackie Lambie's data, which is today 935,000 people are negatively gearers, which is great. But basically double that, around 2 million people are positive gearers. So that's a really interesting signal that for the most part, that 14.4% of taxpayers own a property investment somewhere in Australia where they would be reluctant to sell the property because the property is actually paying for itself. Now, we can explore that actually a little bit later. Is actually the solution of Australia's housing challenges in that number? That would be a very interesting thing for me to explore. But Jackie Lambie and David Pocock obviously have done the maths, and they believe that, we could save a lot of money by not giving the tax advantages to the investor, and we could create this new society where everything is affordable and everyone looks the same and dresses the same, and we could have this society where government helps out everyone and everything is equal. We could call that woke land. We could all go and live in woke land with David Pocock. Would you like to live in woke land where you wake up every day and everyone has the same car and everyone wears the same clothes? Well, woke land exists. It exists certainly in other countries. And I've lived in woke land. I've lived in Sweden, yes. When I left school, I became a socialist and moved to Sweden. And I lived in Sweden for a year. And being a socialist in Sweden for a year in woke land actually made me a capitalist. And when I came home, I became a staunch capitalist. Free market activity is the way to lessen the burden on the system. Now, again, if you can't make money in a capitalist country, you're going to have problems. And one of the challenges for Australians is getting capital into the marketplace. It means we as human beings need to take a lot of responsibility for our economics. We need to leave school learning that we can't just rely on our job, and we're going to have to learn how to be economical. I was speaking to a friend of mine last night. She is a great human being. She's got no super. She's not married. She's 44 years of age. She doesn't make a lot of money, and she is now waking up to the fact that she's running out of time, running out of working years, and really needs to pull the trigger on deploying some of her money into some sort of asset class. And so I have these conversations all the time. I don't know if David Pocock has these conversations or Jackie Lambie, but I have these conversations all the time. And I can see that most people that end up investing in the property market are not wealthy. They are what I would call property savers. Now, you got to understand, I have a unique position in this world where I work in a few real estate verticals. I work in the tier 1 luxury real estate marketplace. And one of my businesses effectively deals with high net worth only customers. And I can see, obviously, their wealth is significant. But I would say most of my day is spent helping average middle-class Australians have a go at the real estate marketplace. And for the most part, they're not trying to rort the system. They're not evil rich people. They're actually what I call property savers. I even think property investment is, in some respects, the wrong word for most of these people. They're property savers. They're just saving for their future. They're doing something today that has an outcome down the track when we're older people, 50, 60, 70 years of age. It's really what most property investors are. They're not actually speculators. They're not trying to trade real estate. They're not trying to flip deals, make a quick buck. They're just regular human beings that get up and go to work every day, exchange their time for money, and have realized that they probably need to think about factoring and economically smoothing out their life by having something at the back end of their life set up for them. And they're doing that through real estate. And that's a beautiful thing because the government can lessen their problem, which is the pension. And of course, we have an aging population base in Australia. So effectively, if you want to think about it in one way, shape or form, if you help people with capital gains tax benefits, and if you help people with negative gearing benefits, you're going to lessen the burden on the eventual pension system. And that is really what this is about. Now, again, we live in a country where we are capitalists, and the challenge for a lot of people is if you don't have capital, you cannot be a capitalist. And again, for a lot of people, the way they live their life is they don't put themselves in a savings position to ultimately invest. That's the reality of it. People live for the moment, they live for the here and now, and then the market moves faster than what people can save at and what typically wage growth is like. So that's what's going on behind the scenes. There's political posturing. And do I think it will eventuate to anything? No, I don't. I think the Labor Party is too smart to lose another election based on tax reform. I think the Liberal Party is pretty clear about what it believes around that. And I think the Labor Party, doesn't mind in general to appeal to the working class battler. And they've been able to win over the working class battler with their energy policies around energy rebates and so forth. Does the Labor Party want a world where everyone's a tenant and there's a small class of people that are wealthy? I don't know, maybe. That they came from that background and they're the working class party. Do they actually then go, well, let's just keep everyone working class and then we'll never lose an election? I don't know what happens behind the scenes with these political people. Most of them, I find, are pretty useless human beings. I've been to plenty of charity events and met plenty of these people, And I got to say, for the most part, it's pretty disappointing what you end up finding out. But let's face it, property investors also take on risk. Now, again, the way it's painted is that real estate investors only win. Well, it's not true whatsoever. Interest rates can come in and cost a bucket load of your cash flow to burn through, to hold real estate. Right now, the burn rate on real estate is not supplemented at all it is supplemented by the negative gearing space, but ultimately you're still burning money out of your back pocket to save for your future. And of course, property investors are subject to economic conditions, the job market. They're subject to, obviously, urban planning and zoning regulations. And all of this is the risk that we as property investors face daily by borrowing money off a bank and buying a property to house a tenant. So I think a little bit of respect would go a long way for those people who are really even property savers, taking this financial burden on to do this for Australia. I do not see the government bringing too many solutions to the table when it comes to fixing affordability and supply. And again, if you want to think about investment, it's a 4-quadrant system. You've got to be willing to put money into the market, but equally, you want that money preserved. You don't want to lose money if you're an investor. Otherwise, no one would do it. And of course, you want an element of growth on your investment. You want some return on your investment, some rent or a yield. And for an investment to make sense today, because of the way the economy works, you need some tax benefits to it. Otherwise, it's just speculation. It's not investing. And again, whenever I look at buying anything, whether it's a business, whether it's real estate, whether it's shares, I have to look at my 4-quadrant investment system: capital preservation, capital growth, rental growth, or a dividend, and the tax advantages to the investment. Now, again, if you were to eliminate negative gearing and capital gains tax, you would obviously destabilize the housing market. There's no if or two buts about it. But you would put yourself in a position where you would not create new supply. New supply would not come through the system. And of course, that would lead to skyrocketing rents, which of course would not be great for those at the bottom of the capitalist food chain who effectively would start to run out of homes. And I would imagine if you actually thought about it and you removed supply of investors bringing housing to the marketplace, you would end up very much like America, where there's large components of people living in their cars, living in the street. Homelessness would absolutely rise. And again, if you were to get rid of supply, then you would actually have to stop migration because you effectively not producing more stock. No one's going to invest in new supply of real estate. So then you're going to have to go, well, okay, we're going to have to halt migration. And of course, there's a challenge around that because Australia's economic system is built on migration. You increase your GDP by bringing more people here. Those people work in the services sector. And again, they feed off each other. They sell each other goods and services. So again, because Australia probably needs to spend more on R&D to produce new industries. Right now, if you tried this policy and you basically then had to slow migration because you weren't producing more stock, you would end up in a place where obviously less migration would actually hurt the economy and GDP. The economy wouldn't grow. And of course, when an economy isn't growing and everyone's in the services sector and you remove demand out of the services sector, you would probably see a rise in unemployment, which again only hurts the person at the bottom of the food chain. So again, eventually you could reposition the economy to be less reliant on the services industry, and you would be able to create wage growth, but that could take a decade. So you might as well invest in R&D through the tax system now and create those industries of tomorrow that effectively aren't in the system right now before you stop mass migration. Now, remember, real estate is connected to pie. The best going real estate is connected to pie, which is population growth, infrastructure growth, and employment growth. If you remove population growth and infrastructure growth through supply, then you're going to remove employment. That's the oxymoron of this whole conversation. And of course, we do need to come up with the solution for more affordable properties. Quite often the challenge here in Australia is the actual cost of supply of real estate. It is expensive. We live, in a island down the bottom of the world away from just about everyone, and that comes with all sorts of cost push effect on it, from getting a container ship here with stuff from overseas to the fact that there are so many people today that work for the government that everything has to have a large proportion of taxes in it. So again, this conversation piece has reared back up. It's definitely a game of political grandstanding at the moment. It's my belief. But of course, if we go back to those 14.4% of property investors that are positive cash flow today, that do not burden the system at all when it comes to negative gearing, there's twice as many property investors that are positive cash flow paying tax. You pay tax when you're positive cash flow. It increases your taxable income when you're positive cash flow. Those 14.4% of property investors may actually be a solution to supply. A lot of property investors end up positive cash flow like me in marketplaces which are very, very good. They're full of pie economics. The reason that people end up positive cash flow is they buy an investment property, they watch it grow, but also the rents end up doubling as well on the investment. Now, if you're like me, you've got some investments which, if you were to sell them, you would pay a huge amount of capital gains tax on the sale. So what do? Well, you basically do nothing because your investment's positive cash flow, and you don't want to pay the CGT tax when you sell the real estate. And of course, let's say by way of example, you've got an $800,000 gain on a property. If you were to sell it, you're going to roughly pay about 25% tax on that sale, which equates to $200,000. Then you've got to weigh up as a property investor. Well, if I go and buy another property, I've got to make at least $200,000 to break even. Plus, I've got to pay stamp duty. So call it $250,000 to break even. So you do not sell the property. That is known as a capital gain lock piece of real estate. You are locked in. You can do it. You can sell it and transfer your wealth to another some other assets, and there's some ways to do that and also contribute to your own super to lessen your capital gain. But for the most part, people don't do it because they're ill-informed, and of course they don't want the tax issue. And of course, if you can't increase new supply because it costs too much, if you don't want to stop your population growth strategy because that's how your economy is geared, then rather than kill CGT and of course, rather than kill CGT and negative gearing, you could look at a certain section of the investor market which is already positively geared. You could say to that section of the market, hey, we'll give you a tax benefit of, for example, free capital gains tax if over the next 10 years you sell your property and rebuy a new one over the course of that 10-year period. And that way you would free up your property for a local home buyer, but you would also buy into the new supply chain of real estate and provide another person a rental property, i.e. you take one property investor, one entrepreneur, and you give that entrepreneur a tax break to, over the next 10 years, sell their real estate. And you do it over, say, a 10-year period. So, every property investor isn't dumping stock and the market doesn't go into some sort of chaotic state and then there's no home equity, because the other big component of real estate is home equity. Home equity is just the wealth effect. If people feel wealthy in their home, they're spending. If someone's spending, someone else is receiving that money. If someone's spending, someone's got a job. That's the economic principle of a circular economy. So over a 10-year period, let's call it a decade, you could say to a property investor who's one of these positive cash flow property investors like me, hey, Sam, we've got a housing problem here. We would love you to free up your investment. As in return, we will give you a tax benefit of free capital gains tax on your sale, as long as you go and rebuy another property in new construction. If you buy a property in new construction, we know you're going to rent that out to a tenant. That way, we're going to help people basically free up established supply for either another investor to buy or primarily the homeowner marketplace, and will also free up some new supply or build some new supply for the tenants of tomorrow. That would be a simple policy. David Pocock and Jackie Lambie, you could ultimately create a level of supply, which also doesn't mean you have to collapse the economy. And of course, you can leave migration rates where they are. You don't have to ultimately reposition your property taxes, which are quite hefty when it comes to stamp duty, when it comes to developer contributions, GST. There's a lot of taxes in property which are created off the property market. The property market is one of the biggest tax-paying vehicles in Australia. Yes, there's some offsets by 6.1% of taxpayers who negatively geared, but they do end up in a positively geared state. So really, I think the model should be, if you want a solution, is help negative gearers get to a place where they're positive cash flow, and then give them even a better CGT discount to ultimately offload their real estate and start again. They go from offloading their real estate to buying a new property, and you would create a mechanism of entrepreneurial supply. You would create a vehicle which brings supply to market. And if you bring supply to market, you would create a level of affordability. Would investors still get good rental returns and capital growth? They would. Would they have to take on as much debt because everything is ultimately more and more and more expensive? No, they wouldn't. So you would just get that nice equalizing effect. And again, it's probably my only solution that I can see that makes a lot of sense for the Australian housing marketplace. But hey, none of that will come to fruition, nor will the battleground of CGT and negative gearing get much further than a report from a Treasury office. And of course, last time Treasury was commissioned to do this report, they actually came out in favor of keeping the tax base the way it was because it would really meddle with supply. All right, folks, that's it from me. Let's talk again soon and catch up on real estate. Thanks for tuning in to the Urban Property Investor. To never miss an episode, make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite app or on YouTube. I would love it if you could give the show a rating and share it with your friends and family. In between episodes, you can always keep in touch with me by connecting on social media over Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Until we meet again on the next episode of the Urban Property Investor, take care and bye for now.